Welcome to The Line. Lawmakers this week got an update on the state's projected budget surplus and a warning. Analysts and economists reported about $1.1 billion in new revenues, which is down just slightly from earlier projections. But they also warned lawmakers to be careful when deciding how to spend that money, given the volatile nature of the oil and gas industry itself. Our Line panelists this week are ready to weigh in with their thoughts and opinions about these forecasts and warnings. I'm joined this week by Tom Garrity of the Garrity Group PR. Also with us is Giovanna Rossi. She is president of the Collective Action Strategies organization and host of KUNM's Well Woman Show, 89.9 your FM dial. Laura Sanchez-Reve, she's here. She's an attorney at Cuddy and McCarthy LLP. And Jeffrey Candelario is with us of Connection Now, also a host of a radio show on KKOB. That's 770 AM on your dial. Now, Tom, analysts with the LFC committee are recommending lawmakers set aside 20% of this newfound money in reserves in case the market goes south. Now, you say that a little flippantly, but national pundits are all saying 2020 could be a difficult year financially across the country here. Are we wise to take that approach, or are they wise to tell us to take that approach?
Both.
Okay.
It's just smart budgeting. Whenever you have a surplus of any kind, it's good just to kind of set a little bit aside, 20% to replenish the reserves is a smart move.
Right.
Also using that funding to repair existing infrastructure as well as to build new infrastructure. Notice I didn't say jobs.
Right.
And then find a way, because the reason why we are in so much volatility as far as the budget is concerned is because of the oil and gas industry. Right. And volatility there will impact the state immediately. So I think what other funds should be used for is to diversify the economy by encouraging counties and municipalities to provide some kind of payback to them to attract and generate new business from within.
This is interesting.
So that way, the money is being put to use. It's a one-time use.
Right.
You're not building those recurring jobs, but you're promoting an economic base and building that base to really kind of build the economy for the future.
That's an interesting point. I want to talk more about that. That's interesting. Laura, the idea from LFC is another one in saying, look, we're going to spend on something, let's do it on something hard and tangible, meaning Tom mentioned it, infrastructure projects as well. Does that make sense to you as well? Because we have a bit of a backlog here, as well as our inability to fund the things we've already funded, if that makes sense, or get going the things we've already funded. Is it time to do that kind of thing too?
Well, I think that it's going to be a challenge, because when you see a surplus and you get headlines about there being a surplus and you have the momentum of a new administration and so many new faces of the legislature, you're going to inevitably have people who have demands or ideas about what they want to spend money on. And so it's going to be a really big challenge, I think, for people to be prudent about their decisions this legislative session. I think legislators do need to be careful about how they spend that money, not sort of take on recurring costs that wouldn't be funded in future years. But the other issue too is that we have some real need. In particular, the pension system here in New Mexico is fundamentally broken at some level. And so, we've been hearing, I think, really it's beyond the canary in the coal mine as far as what that system is doing right now. And they really need to have a better plan in terms of how to fully fund the pension need right now, because we have a huge gap. And so that's an area that it's not sexy necessarily. It's not something that necessarily will get a whole lot of play, but I do think that there's some responsible parties out there that will be advocating for that.
That's a good issue, because that could swamp the boat of everything else if you really look at it. I mean, those costs, the freight train coming down on us is very frightening. Giovanna, we've got other issues out there too, CYFD, people wanting more funding, behavioral health issues. We need to play some catch-up ball on what we lost during the Martinez administration. That's a big one. That's going to cost a couple of bucks. So there's a tension here between stuff that would, engender recurring costs in the one-time kind of a thing. Do you know what I mean? That it's easy to kind of bail and we'll just do infrastructure for now.
Yeah.
But is that going to work for certain people here?
I mean, I think, as others have said already, we have to do we have to have a balanced approach, and we do have to have some caution with not doing a whole lot of recurring spending. But I think there's an opportunity to do something bold. And I mentioned this earlier, and instead of just doing the same old thing and checking the boxes and saying, okay, we're covering our bases and we're doing the basics, let's do something creative and bold, and let's look at the new governor's vision and really support some of the proposals that she has, and maybe some new proposals. I mean, maybe maybe there are some other things that we can do and look at. But I really think looking at renewable energy, investing in some of the diversifying our economy and investing in that is going to be really important. And if we just simply say, okay, we need to fund education and these things, without looking at really deeply looking at some of those root causes and doing something bold and creative, then we're just sort of where we were before.
Yeah. Are those bold ideas possible from folks who have been holding the line for a lot of years? You know what I mean? We've got some new faces in the House side of our legislature, but you know what, on the Senate side, we don't have a whole lot of new faces there. A lot of those faces control the money. So that boldness is going to be a little bit difficult to push through, I would think.
Yeah, well, I think that when legislators hear from their constituents, they get a little bolder.
Right, right. That's right.
And so I think that
These are the times we're in right now.
That's really a part of it, is that is when citizens, you know, really 10, 20 people showing up in an office is a big deal in Santa Fe, right?
That's
So
right.
we do need to get out there.
Thank you for saying that. That is true. That has influence when constituents show up. Exactly right. Jeffrey, your thoughts on this? You know, the LFC is saying, look, the last time we had a big windfall, it preceded a recession. And we had to dip into tobacco money, we had to dip into all kinds of other money to pay for things. We got a little crazy there. Are we a little snake bit here, or do you agree that perhaps this is a moment here that
I
we
think
should
there are
grab?
so many moving parts in this topic. What I want to point out is the industry itself is based on supply and demand models, which can be artificially manipulated. OPEC just announced that next year it's going to decrease supply or production,
right.
which you can manipulate the supply and demand dynamic. Then there's the allure of geologists recently announcing that West Texas, New Mexico, may be producing these prodigious amounts of this thing called our resource of oil and gas.
That's right.
So it's kind of like a person that's on a diet going to an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Right.
I mean, you've got to be careful with the allure of this prodigious announcement of more findings. And at the same time, when you have a governor-elect that says she wants to spend almost $1 billion in the educational program, which is a recurring fund.
Sure.
And to your point, there's also the pension monies, $18 billion over the next 30 years, whatever that is. So you have all these dynamics that are impacting, not to mention this thing called our automobile, which is sustainable based on this resource. Are we going to redirect our energies to have other forms of transportation? So it's not a very simple, I guess you'd say, there's not a simple answer to this.
Right.
And then you've got the recurring monies versus, as you mentioned, more the capital outlay monies, which are earmarked for one-time expenditures. And then on top of all that, New Mexico, in all its wisdom, and I'm being sarcastic, elects a land commissioner who is not necessarily welcoming to the very industry that's providing all these resources called dollars.
Yeah. Laura, I want to touch on a couple things Jeffrey mentioned there, the Permian Basin discovery, that this thing could be enormous for New Mexico. I'm wondering if that gives some legislators the idea that, look, this money might be around for a while. It might be more than a windfall. We might have a good run here of some. Would that change the dynamics in the thinking in that kind of a deal?
Well, I mean, I think it confirms what a lot of people in that area already probably believe.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that it necessarily changes the approach that legislators from that area would take.
Sure.
But I think that also people are cautious in that area as well. I mean, if you, and I spend at least 2-3 days a month there these days in the southeast, Lee and Eddy County in particular. And there's a lot going on there, but there's definitely a lack of. I mean, there's just such a boom that it's affecting the economy a lot. I mean, hotel rooms are outrageous. There's a lack of adequate housing.
Right.
So you have a tremendous amount of influx of workers, and then there's a housing shortage, which drives the housing for just people who aren't part of the oil and gas industry, but that are in these other industries, restaurant, tourism, hotels,
That's right.
grocery stores, even education. I mean, it's impacting all of that. And so I think that there is sort of a cautious approach to some of that, and we need to be cautious as a state. But the important thing is to start to look at ways to diversify the economy as well. I mean, this is the time when you know you have some additional revenue coming in that you can start to figure out how do we diversify so that when we do have those downturns, we're not completely reliant on the oil and gas industry.
Exactly. Giovanna, I was struck by one of our comments persons on our Facebook, New Mexico Facebook group page, Cindy. She mentioned that, look, we've got a blue wave that we're part of here. And there is a mandate that this governor and this legislature has to pay attention to. And these are impatient times, and they want to see action now on a lot of things. Is this possible in this environment? And does she have a point? First of all, is this a mandate? I mean, do you think about all the Democrats that swept into office this past cycle? Does that fit?
I mean, yeah, I think when you have such overwhelming, results in the election that needs to be looked at.
Right.
But I think that we do need to, just back to the conversation about the projected large amounts of money possibly coming in. I don't think that the only issue is the land commissioner not being supportive of the industry. I think there are a lot of people that aren't just not supportive of the industry, but really want to see us taking care of our climate and our natural resources. And so there are lots of people. It's not just the land commissioner. It's the citizens of New Mexico. So we really have to balance. Okay, we've got all this money. Let's spend it. With how are we going to take care of our state for the future generations? And so that conversation really needs to happen.
I also think that's an important point is, it's not black and white. It's not like everybody who lives in southeastern New Mexico is 100% yes, let's just go wildcat completely crazy with oil and gas.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of people who are part of local government there that see the impacts to their area, in particular in water. And actually the current state land commissioner has also had his own issues with the oil and gas industry. I mean, he's kicked out a couple of companies that basically have not been responsible about the way that they've cited their operations in that area on state land. And so I don't think it's as black and white, and I think people have the perception that sort of everybody in that region is going to be 100%, let's just go, without any kind of restraint. But I think that people who live in that area who are impacted by the additional congestion, by the traffic, by the road conditions, there's just sort of externalities that affect that region, and I think that we have to be cognizant of that.
That's right. Good point there. That's all the time we have on that one right now on the line. When we come back to the discussion about how well the state is doing to prepare teachers for the classroom.